Please be seated. Dear people of St. Andrew's in Staten Island, and those of you here from Grace in Nyack, it is a wonderful day as we gather today. Reverend Hyde, Bishop Glasspool, Bishop Dici. In concerning the service of the church, on page 13 of the Book of Common Prayer, we read, "In all services, the entire Christian assembly participates in such a way that the members of each order within the church, laypersons, bishops, priests, and deacons, fulfill the functions proper to their respective orders." Having gathered on this day for this joyous occasion, Lainey's and Dave's ordinations, we get to experience the fullness of worship when all orders are represented. And to not give the impression that this is relevant only to us who are facing you, it includes everyone here. Your participation in singing and in praying and in participating in the Eucharistic feast. Although we may more commonly see deacons participating in worship, as in the case with Deacon Pedro and Deacon Pamela and Deacon Fred today, deacons are called to a special ministry of servanthood. And it is primarily in their servanthood that we are called to support them. As a whole assembly, we have already enthusiastically and loudly indicated our will for them to be ordained, and that we will uphold them in their ministries. It is through these ministries that Lainey and Dave have responded to their calling, and of which they soon will be reminded by Bishop Dici when he's going to summarize for you what you've gotten yourselves into. And right about now, the reality is setting in a little as you finish one leg of your journey and begin the next. In the job description he will read soon, you were here. You're to interpret to the church the needs, concerns, and hopes of the world. Sure, this happens in worship and the prayers of the people, customarily led by deacons. Yet, this interpretation is often made real by their ministries. The ministries you have promised today to support them in. Yes, you all did just promise that. In our individual parishes, we do not always know what wide-ranging ministries deacons are involved in elsewhere in the diocese. Yet, since we are gathered this morning as a sample of the diocese, let me share with you a little bit of the great ministries that Dave and Lainey are involved in. Dave from St. Andrew's in Staten Island works with adults of all ages with Lifestyles for the Disabled, a Staten Island organization that helps to foster independence, promote community involvement through recreational, occupational, and service opportunities. In their gatherings, not only are their lives enriched, but the lives of all around them. I'm sure those of you in St. Andrew's in Staten Island know this, but Dave's enthusiasm about this ministry is contagious. And I can't wait for him to convince many of you to support and participate in that ministry. Lainey from Grace Church in Nyack is passionate about advocacy, especially advocacy for trans people and communities, and will continue this ministry aiming to connect congregations and local pride organizations to each other. I can't not wait for the transformation of those communities, especially as Lainey patterns her life as an example of what it means to be an ally to trans people and communities, something that right now is life-saving, giving the erosion of rights for trans folks across the country. All of today's readings, as part of the propers for the ordination of deacons, echo this special ministry of servanthood. Sure, these readings are precisely meant to evoke Dave and Lainey's diaconal calling. In the gospel we hear, the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like one who serves. In the epistle, we can see how deacons can give witness to the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ, and how they do not proclaim themselves, they proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord. In the reading from Jeremiah, we have an example of being called by God. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. And for those of you planning ahead, by liturgical coincidence, tomorrow's collect says, "Grant that when we hear God's voice, we may know the God who calls us each by name and follow God where he leads." Lainey and Dave have indeed been called by God and have chosen to follow where God leads, a life of service as deacons. To me, the words of the collect and the passage from Jeremiah provide some of the most intimate images of God's chosen relationship with each one of us. As I shared with Lainey and Dave, we spend a lifetime learning about and living into the person that God has known us always to be. And in God knowing us this way, there's no hiding from God's call to each of us, lay and ordained, however long it may take to answer God's nudges. Having said this, though, I would propose that these readings can also be understood more broadly. The fact that God calls each one of us by name reminds us also that each of us, known by name, are chosen by God as ministers. And we live into that by virtue of our own baptism. Hence the fullness of worship when all orders are represented. For example, together we can continue in the apostles' teaching and fellowship in the breaking of the bread and in the prayers. Therefore, everyone is reflected in the calling that we hear from Jeremiah. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Ordination and baptism are intimately connected. Once ordained, you continue to fulfill your baptismal promises, realizing them in new ways. In particular, today we see and hear of new ways of living into the promises of seeking and serving Christ in all persons, striving for justice and peace among all people, respecting the dignity of every human being. Promises that are outward-facing, and I believe of particular import to the order of deacons. These baptismal promises will come alive in such new ways in the ministries of Dave and Lainey as soon as they're ordained. And by fulfilling their baptismal promises as deacons, they live into what we hear in the second letter to the Corinthians, that they have commended themselves plainly to the conscience of everyone in the sight of God, and have answered the call to share the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. By working with people with disabilities and advocating for trans communities, folks that we know are traditionally marginalized and excluded from the image of God and to be called. Dave and Lainey lift everyone's consciousness to the people they serve and advocate for. They make the plain truth of the gospel be in the sight of everyone else, in their persons and in their service. Dave and Lainey see Christ in them. Lainey and Dave strive for justice for them. Dave and Lainey respect their dignity. All of today's readings can indeed be read as being about them. And today is a very special day, so part of it is that. But I believe that precisely because they're called to be deacons, that the readings are categorically not about them, but about the people they serve and the ways they lift them up. For far too long, marginalized communities are not given a place at the table or are respected, and we choose not to see Christ in them. They have been marginalized from many communities, even the church. By serving with people in these diverse communities, Dave and Lainey put people with disabilities and trans folks into the midst of Christian assembly and plainly model giving them a place at the table. The light of the glory of God that they share is in the lives of the people they serve, the very people that are already known by God, who share the countenance of God, whose dignity is lifted up in these ministries, and for whom justice is sought. This is the beautiful diaconal call for Lainey and Dave. I look forward to seeing what you do to make those around you better in your unique ways and through your unique gifts. I trust that the clergy and lay people of all of the congregations that you will serve get to know how lucky they are to have these vocational deacons among them. This is a part that I may not get through without being emotional. For most of my 19 years at St. Matthew's and St. Timothy's, I've had the privilege of serving alongside vocational deacons. From Deacon Horace, to Deacon George, to Deacon Pedro, and most recently having had the privilege to serve as a presenter for Deacon Chris for his ordination. And as I once wrote about Deacon George to the bishop, serving alongside a deacon has made me a better priest. That is the beauty of the different orders working together. Having these experiences with these wonderful diaconal examples confirms to me the longtime desire of this diocese to have a vocational deacon in every congregation. I think that Deacon Denise is ready to walk with them in their formation and make that happen. So those of you who are not ordained but are here, is God nudging you? Or do you know someone that God is nudging and they just need a little push toward it? It is imperative and part of God's calling for all of us to be reminded that God has always known us. And because of that, there is no hiding. We all gathered here and in the diocese have a role in raising up those that will be servants in ministry. Amen.